the event so that you can see what it is that we're talking about today. Thank you for joining us. It really is a great pleasure to have everyone here today. The reactions are open. If you like what we're saying, please show us in the reactions. If you like what, if you want to chat, let us know where you're from. And then the Q&A function is also open today. A little bit about the event today here is in a little video. Thank you so much. And with that, I'd like to welcome Cesar. Cesar is part of our research forum and was also the editor-in-chief for our new journal. But let me hand over to Cesar. This is her webinar today. Welcome, everybody.
Thank you so much, Caroline. And dear audience, thank you very much for joining our session. And we are so excited to welcome our esteemed guest speaker today, Matthias Muhlert. And when you look at his career, you can see many interesting things. And since we have limited time before we start listening to him, I would like to give some nice anecdotes about his career. For instance, he is a certified ethical hacker at the same time, innovator in cybersecurity, and also brain-computer firewall, like, layered defense model establishment for cyber defense, strategies, which is quite needed nowadays. And he's so passionate about the strategies related to philosophy and technology, and it's also connected to the design and use of these technologies. And in connection to this, we have the governance of technology. And in such a digital, environment, we need to know about our limits, how technology forces us to rethink what it means to be human, and also other details in relation to complexities. And Matthias will let us know about all the things, some chapters from his recent book, and hopefully we will continue collaborating after this event. And floors is yours, Matthias. Thank you very much once again being with us today. Thank you.
Excellent. Thank you very, very much for the warm welcome. And yeah, I also would like to say hello, good morning, good afternoon, wherever you are within this webinar. And I'm really happy to give you a couple of my insights, a couple of my thoughts. And as Cesar pointed out, I mean, it should not be a one-time thing. It should be something where we can all collaborate and maybe come up with better solutions, because different perspectives. What this webinar is all about is only coming from different people and different regions. So I'm really looking forward not just to that webinar, but to future exchanges. And Cesar, thank you very much for those kind words. I'm already blushing, which is not good for the webinar, but thank you for that. And also, just to make a small announcement, Cesar and I, we're working on something which we called the Age of Singularities, and there will be interesting things to come up. But without further ado, I will focus a little bit on the other screen, so I won't see too many of the comments, but please keep them coming. Cesar will have a little bit of a look at the comments, and we will have a little bit of a Q&A session as well. So without further ado, I think, Cesar, can you nod if you see the presentation? Is the presentation visible?
Yes, you can continue, please.
Okay, excellent. So welcome to the webinar. So what is it all about, right? As announced on certain social medias, it's a little bit about governance, innovation, and philosophical thinking brought together, right? So as you already can see, that's the meta layer, right? We are trying to integrate knowledge system and mastering complexity from different angles, from different thoughts. And I think that's really the key. So if the first sentence hits you, that's basically the key takeaway from today's webinar. What I did is when I created the presentation afterwards will also be made available. I tried to come up with a simple use case, and I was looking for something which ended with AI, which was not already a given name. So I came up with supercalifragilistic AI. I hope this is not existing anywhere, but all the other combination of any words were already registered with AI. So this is a small company, and they are trying to come up with something fantastic. They have an integration where they say, well, we can really do a new kind of interconnection and collaboration tool for the communities. And so it all looks good, right? Market opportunities there, the firm has strong support and everything. But on the surface, there's a little bit bubbling certain things, right? So there's a little bit of dispute within the teams and so forth. And if you try to think of that in a more one-dimensional system, then you might lose a little bit the whole thing. So the key ideas for today's webinar is therefore, let's look at this challenge, competing priorities in complex systems. Let's look at the meta-level integration of the framework. So not coming up with too many new frameworks, but how do the existing frameworks work together? And hopefully also for you listeners, the outcome will be turning chaos into a competitive advantage. With that being said, in Germany we have a saying, I think it's globally available. So sometimes you don't see the forest because of all the trees, and that's where the meta level is necessary. So if you take yourself a little bit back, if you take another perspective, you're already training to think on a meta level, which is a necessity in today's world. So coming back to supercalifragilistics engineer, they say something like, oh, by the way, we have some privacy safeguard issues. They might slash our user engagement from 18% to 10%. And oh, by the way, we had some fairness audits in regard to AI, and it seems that we have some biases against non-English speakers. So on the same hand, the investors say, well, get started. We want to earn money, right? This is costing us 2.3 million every quarter. So, and therefore you have all of a sudden a dynamic, it's like, oh, the one section wants this, the other section wants that, faster, deeper, safer, all at the same time. And this is what we're talking about, meta levels, to see how can we move away from those dilemmas and maybe find a multidimensional solution and not just a single domain solution. Good. So why do single frameworks, in my perspective, most of the time fail, right? All those single frameworks, they are actually doing what they are supposed to do. They look at their domain and they try to make what is best for their domain to work, right? So every employee that we have, or every partner that we have, or every collaboration that we have, they have a certain goal and they are trying to optimize for that goal, right? They are trying to optimize for that goal, which is limited to one model. And therefore, we all, most of the time, have a model boundary problem, right? Where we don't look outside the boundaries. And that's where this whole meta level thinking comes from, right? So we have, for example, ethical frameworks, right? They look at abstract principles, but on the other side, they clearly lack handling of real-world trade-offs, right? Then we have technical guidelines. They say like, oh, how can I make the optimized code? How can I make the fastest AI? How can I make the most efficient AI? But they have a tendency to ignore certain human concerns. And then on a base, you have, of course, business strategies. And I particularly put it as a base because most of the companies are not here just for the fun of it, but to actually produce money or to make an income or to make something better. So therefore, the business strategies is most of the time, it's the baseline, but they might have a tendency to look for profitability and speed and maybe ignoring is too much of a word, but maybe neglecting a little bit the ethics and the long-term trust topics. So it's, as you can see, right, I try to make the picture with the Rubik's Cube. If you try to solve a Rubik's Cube, right, you need to look at all sides. You can't just look at one side, even if that, for your model, for your specific domain, might be the optimal solution. You will never solve the Rubik's Cube if you don't look at the other sides. I hope this mental picture resonates with most of you. So we always need to look at different aspects. So what is a possible solution? Yeah, try to think on a meta layer, right? So what supercalifragilistic, by now, by the way, I'm totally aware that I might mispronounce supercalifragilistic quite often, so please excuse on that. AI, and so they need to look at the different stakeholders. They may need to make trade-offs, and then they need to turn tensions into touch points for innovation. So those are the 3 steps, more or less, that you kind of need to take on that. And therefore, what I tried to create was 3 simple, I call it tools, but you can just call them mental models or whatever. But basically, those 3 tools are there to guide you through those different steps. So therefore, meta layer thinking or this meta level approach is not something new. It's just how do we take a different look at things, right? And it should not complicate things. It should actually harmonize and simplify things. Goal, of course, we are in a complex world. How do we deal with complexity? Well, basically, stay curious is the first answer, how to deal with complexity. And meta-level thinking might help you in that. So what do? I came up with a toolkit. As pointed out, you can call it however you like. And maybe it's just simple models, but it is something that should guide you through those 3 steps. So we'll be starting off with the integration canvas, and then we're going on to the contradiction navigator, and then we go to the adaptive integration matrix afterwards. So this is just an introduction, and I'm really liking how AI comes up with fantastic pictures. So those were the only prompts I used, and it came up with those pictures. Isn't it lovely by now? So where do we start? We start with the integration canvas. By the way, as you can see here, I didn't draw the integration canvas itself because I didn't want to limit any one of your imagination. The important word about those, well, there are 2 important words, right? So first of all, it's an integration, and the second word is a canvas, right? So it should be colorful. It should be, so if you come up with a canvas which then afterwards has only the color black on it, you're probably not doing the integration canvas really well. You should use a lot of colors. It should become a really lovely painting, and it should focus on a couple of things. So, keep a lot of colors handy, and then let's start into the integration canvas. And as pointed out, it should look, for every one of you, it should look differently. So first of all, it should look at the different frameworks. So which frameworks do we actually need to comply to? Which frameworks do we actually need to look at? Like GDPR, AI fairness, business KPIs, and all this kind of thing. So also other regulations that might follow or need to be followed. Then we have the stakeholders, regulators, users, engineers, legal department, compliance department, and so forth. So you really need to go there and, sort out all the stakeholders that there are. And then you need to draw pictures in regards to what are the tensions or what are the intentions of those different people, and make it really colorful. So, what are the doubts of the different stakeholders? What are the ideas of the different stakeholders? How does that correlate with the frameworks? Use the colors. It's like if we have an intention from the user base, and that's actually colliding with the framework that you also need to follow, then make that a colorful image so that we have all the tensions, so that we have all the stakeholders. And once again, let me stress that with the stakeholders, you should have a clear understanding afterwards, what are their intentions and what are their doubts or what are their fears. This should particularly come up as well, as a lot of those tensions will also result from contradictions in maybe those goals. So this should be not an endless exercise. This should be actually a fast and intuitive exercise. See that all the people are coming together in a fast way, and let them build their own canvases and maybe come up then with the canvases in a second step. So this is the integration canvas. It is your step back. It's your way of not looking just at the trees, but look at the complete forest, right? This is your way to take a step back and make it really visible. It's a fantastic, simple topic, but it helps you so much. Then the next is the contradiction navigator, right? So just picture those that canvas that you put in there, right? And then you draw tensions, right? And you draw certain contradictions with, business ideas, with regulations, human fears, fears from your employees, also take in fears from your employees to get redundant due to this new AI or this kind of things. Take this all in, and then look at the contradiction navigator, how those contradictions can be solved. One little thing, whenever I do the exercise, it turns out that most of the time those contradictions can actually be done or can be dealt with in a hybrid solution. And one of the big things, as this is also about ethics, it is most of the time really dealt with transparency. Really be transparency from your customers to your internal employees to make that really clear. So once we identified all these tensions, we can then say, what's actually the risk here, right? And then actually play through the risks so that you have some sort of quantification, right? So what does it mean that we might have GDPR issues here? Or what does it mean that we might lose customer trust here? What can we actually do? And then make a proper balance and compare those risks, because these steps will help you then to actually navigate or actually, give you a good idea where to come from. So what does the navigator force you to do? It clearly labels the topics that you need to deal with. It clearly points out where the next actions are. And it's a clear statement, and it's a clear way to actually give you an idea how to go about. One topic, and Cesar was kindly pointing it out, I'm thinking lately a lot about thinking systems and all of this kind of stuff. And therefore, I wanted to point out that there are a couple of biases that you need to look out for in the first exercise, and then particularly also in that exercise. So the biases that you need to look out for is let us start off with the first one, groupthink. So basically, we have a tendency in a bigger group to think alike. And that is actually an issue, right? Because certain new ideas or certain new solutions might not actually come up if you only work in a group thing. So what can we do about this? For example, if you start off with the integration canvas, let everyone do the integration canvas on its own. Don't make the first one all together. Of course, at a certain stage, you need to come together and then align on it, but you will only navigate around certain groupthink biases if you do that on an individual level at the first step. As pointed out, only at the first step. Afterwards, you need to go ahead and do something else, or you need to work together, of course. The next bias I really want to point out is the confirmation bias. And the confirmation bias is such a, if you look through history, you will find a lot of group decisions which were impacted by the confirmation bias. And that's, of course, deeply rooted in our psychology, right? So we don't really want to alienate anything within the group. We want to be harmonious. We want to work together. So, but that might actually be a really issue if we're suffering too much from the confirmation bias. So what can we do about that? One simple solution might be you actually print out a devil's advocate page, and everyone in the room needs to get, in a certain fashion, needs to play devil's advocate at a certain stage. Not all at once, that doesn't really make sense, but have that one person who has visibly this card in hand, so that we know that he's now playing the devil's advocate and he's trying to put new ideas, new perspectives. So it's not him as such, he's playing a vital, important role. So confirmation bias most of the time can be actually dealt with such simple trips. Take the devil advocate, print it out, give it one person during the meeting, and let him really try to see things from a different angle. One last bias I want to point out is the pluralistic ignorance bias, which for me is a fascinating one because it works both ways. It works in a positive as well as in a negative way. So it's kind of interesting. So if we think about ourselves, right, in certain things we are liberal, right, in certain things we are conservative, but the pluralistic ignorance, which has been proven many times in many experiments, always we are thinking differently of the rest of the group than we are actually thinking about ourselves, right? So we might think like, oh, I'm not that fussed with that certain topic that we are looking at, but I'm pretty sure that the others are obsessed with it, or that they absolutely need that. And as pointed out at the beginning, it's one of the biases that works in both ways. So it might also be completely the other way around. So that we are really strict and think everyone else is strict, but the others are rather liberal on it. One of the things how to get around this as well is, again, nearly the same solution that we can use for groupthink. So if we start on an individual level and ask everyone not just to fill out the integration canvas for themselves, but also for the other team members, right? So to really say, okay, do the integration canvas for every other team as well. And then afterwards, actually try to compare what's coming out. A lot of the times we think like, oh, this department, the HR department or the ethics department or the compliance department, they will go really crazy about this topic. And then afterwards, just compare the two. And why this is really important, because some of the tensions that you identified might actually be not that much of an intention and might actually not be an issue at all. So working against this bias is a really good idea to reduce the tensions and to make it something something beautiful. Good. Enough talk about this. I will gracefully take a sip. Sorry for that. And then we look at the last part of the tool set, and I called it an adaptive integration matrix. Basically, most of you, if you look at it, it looks quite a lot like the Eisenhower method. And of course, I have been inspired by it, but if I call it the Eisenhower method, then it would not be my invention, right? So no, just kidding. So, but most of the time, you actually need to give certain things a name so that they can actually be used. What's a little bit the difference? So don't get me wrong, I think the Eisenhower method is really, really important. But the Eisenhower method has a little bit of a limitation because it's looking at, from my perspective, on an individual level and not on a global or at a team level. So the Eisenhower method, right, says high priority, high urgency, and basically my twist is here that I'm replacing it with complexity, because the higher the complexity is, the different solutions you kind of need to take. So let us look at the matrix first. So we have high urgency, low complexity, right? So for example, within the AI from supercalifragilistic, you actually just need to add a consent button for the user, right? To say, are you okay with us using your data for this and that? So the urgency is really high because this is, of course, something where the regulators will have an eye on. But the complexity to add this button is rather low, right? And this tells you already, when to do something and with what kind of efforts do you need to do something. So low complexity is most of the time an indication that that this topic can be dealt with individuals. If I have a high complexity, it's most of the time an indication that you actually can't deal with that on an individual basis, but you kind of need to deal with that in teamwork, right? So that's also where there's a little bit of difference regarding to the Eisenhower method. So let's jump on to the next thing: low urgency, high complexity. Those kind of things, is something where the strategy comes in, right? So we can say like, oh, what kind of features do we want to have in version 2, or what kind of features do we want to have in version 3, and so forth. So it's not that urgent as such, but it's also not something that you can, source out to an individual or to a small team. It's something where multiple teams need to work together. So the meta level really forces you to say what needs to be done in teamwork, what needs to can be done by individuals, right? Then we have come to the really topic: high urgency and high complexity. So in the example, I was pointing out some fairness issues, and fairness issues are really difficult because fairness issues is not something where you just make a bug fix in the code, because that's really something. So high urgency, high complexity. So you need to get on it sooner than later, and you really need to put together teams to work on this. Then the last one is low urgency, low complexity. And this is something where you can actually prioritize. And this is something where individuals can do the trick. So for the example I came up here was build internal documentation. Don't get me wrong, low urgency, low complexity. If you neglect it, it can become all of a sudden a high complexity or high urgency. So I'm not saying don't do it. I'm saying, use it at the right amount of effort. Good. So next one. So those are the 3 tools. And now let's crank up the level of meta thinking a little bit. So what do I mean by that? We need to see that we have different knowledge systems at our hand. And the most important knowledge systems that I think are important for such kind of topics is really the 4 pillars that are here below. So why do I say this is cranking up the meta level? Because you need to understand in which of those 4 knowledge systems you are actually working in. And you need to understand what your partners, your collaborators, your employees, in which knowledge system they are actually working in, and then draw together the right amount of people from the right amount of knowledge systems to come things together. So you need to think about yourself and you need to think about others, and this is a prime task for thinking on a meta level. So what do I mean by those knowledge systems? So let's start off with the top left, theoretical knowledge, right? You need someone, let's call him book smart, right? You need someone who has an understanding of models. You need someone who has an understanding of regulations and all this kind of stuff. This is really, really, really good. And this is also something when it comes to strategic topics, something of a knowledge system that helps you on a strategy level. But this needs to be side guarded. So let's jump to the top right. This needs to be fed with empirical knowledge. So actually user data, actually information from the field, actually information about how a customer would react, how users would react, how people would react, and how we can actually establish a certain transparency in all the data that we have. So we need someone who has this empirical knowledge so that we can actually base our decisions, and all this is about making decisions, right? That we can actually base this on data and facts. Then let's go to the bottom right, practical knowledge. This is someone who actually did this before, right? So you need to have a couple of people who actually did something before, who know where the traps are, they know where the gaps are, who know what works easily, what works fast, what works not so good. So you need someone who actually did that. So the practical level is then practical knowledge system is really, really important. Last, but definitely not least, is the last knowledge system that I consider worthwhile integrating in this whole meta-level thinking is the intuitive one. So intuitive is especially when you need to have fast decisions and when you don't have the empirical data yet, right? You kind of need to act intuitively. Don't get me wrong, it should still be followed up by practical and empirical knowledge, but the intuitive things is really important. And as we are also talking about fairness, right? The intuitive manager has a really good feeling when his team is actually getting exhausted, when his teams is actually working on their limits, when the team are close to a burnout, right? This is something that only the intuitive knowledge system will actually show you, right? This will not come up through theoretical knowledge. This will not come up through empirical knowledge. It might come up through practical knowledge, but it's this intuitive and this empathy level that is necessary to make this really working well. So as pointed out, this is really thinking on a meta level, on a higher level, because you need to understand what kind of knowledge system you need. You need to understand in what kind of knowledge system you are, and you need to understand where the other peoples are in their knowledge system to put that all together. So what does that mean? So for the case study, the supercalifragilistic, before we only had conflicts, we had a still stand because no one was taking decisions. We had a disruptive team. We had the launch date being postponed on a constant basis. So with this meta level thinking, 2 days max, we have a fairness roadmap where we say, okay, how can we be transparent? We have a better trust score. We have a better engineering ideas and all this kind of stuff, and we get the deadline running. So this is, of course, a hypothetical, but most of the experience that I had, I'm actually mirroring this quite a lot. Oof. Let's take a small breath. So now we were thinking on this meta level, right? Which is really fantastic. However, you kind of need to understand where you are. You kind of need to understand what you're actually creating. You kind of need to understand what needs to be actually done. And a fantastic man called Mr. Wortley came up with the maps. And it was such a revelation for me to say, yeah, of course you need to work with maps, right? Because if you want to know where you are and where you go to, it's not two single points. It's not a line. It's a map. So what he came up with is really a fantastic toolkit. So basically, you kind of have different evolution steps, and then you have certain value chains. And those value chains are really interesting because they show you how visible or how invisible they are, right? This is the most simple topic that I can come up with. You know, the user needs a cup of tea, so he needs hot water, and for that he needs power. So the user actually never sees the power, right? He might see the hot water boiling somewhere, but it's mostly unlikely. But he actually sees the cup of tea. So use this Wortley maps to actually understand where you are in the evolution, where you are in the visibility and invisibility, and basically make it the connection to the engine, right? So we had all this meta level thinking. We all came up with when do we need to take what actions, but this needs to be put on a map. It needs to be shown what actually relies on those different steps. And then looking at the evolution, this is a highly important point as well. You kind of need to, you know, most of the innovations start with, you know, Genesis, then we have a custom build, then we actually have a product, and then we have a commodity, right? And when your solutions moves along this evolution from step to step, you should try to take the meta level toolkit again and say, hey, hang on a minute. Do we have new stakeholders? Do we have new partners? What are their intentions? What do we need to do? So every evolution step should have a short repeat of this meta level thinking. And what I find really, really useful is also you can then take certain decisions where you say, like, do I actually need to custom build something myself? Or do I actually have a commodity, right? So which I try to ironically make here with the teacup solution, because most of the time you will actually not create your own hot water. That's a commodity, right? So this bottle should probably be then the next time you look at it, it should probably be at a commodity section or at the product section. So you have a clear understanding when to do the meta level thinking again. You have a clear understanding how to, you know, put all these strategies into effect and how put this all things together. So hopefully this Wortley maps gives you a really good idea to say, where am I with my innovations? What do I need to do myself? When do I need to run the meta level approach again? When do I need to put things in motion? When do I need to stop certain things? And I can't stress that enough. The high visibility and invisible is really, really important, because if you start to think too much on the meta level, especially the invisible bubbles will disappear. They will not be known to you. So have a real detailed look on that as well. So what I think about this is that if you use that correctly, if you master this kind of things, and basically mastering this kind of things is an effort. I think most of us have heard the sentence where we say, you know, the mind is a muscle. And I think that's actually true, but I think it's only half of it. So the mind is a muscle, but if we take that analogy, so if I go to the gym, and believe me, I don't, but if I would go to the gym and I would only train my left arm, my brain would only be good in understanding the left arm, right? So the more you train your brain to think on a meta level, right, the more it will, understand that there are different muscles. It will understand that you need to work on different things as well, right? So the mind is a muscle, yes, but look out what you're training it for. Another example, especially when it comes to the ethics topic, if you train your muscle only to spot bad things, your mind will become particularly good in spotting bad things, but it will ignore the positive things, right? So train your mind, but be careful on what you train it for, or be cautious on what you train it for, because sometimes it's also really good to train your mind on positive kind of things. So with that being said, you can harmonize ethics, technology, and business. I think it's never a no-go. I think the meta level is not just a toolkit; it's a way of thinking that I try to explain with that, and make it a habit. So to conclude a little bit, ready for action, right? So Canvas, reveal what's invisible. The navigator, choose a balanced path, right? And to be honest, transparency is most of the time a really good way, because with transparency, you can inform your stakeholders and say, like, okay, we're not going to do step X, Y, Z yet directly. We have planned it, but we roll it out in that way so that we can actually find a balanced path. And then we have the matrix at the end, and to say, okay, where do we put our efforts in most likely? So with that, I want you, the attendees, the audience, I would like to make a call to action for you guys. So before this webinar ends, just recap a little bit, where do I have dilemmas in my team, speed versus safety, for example, right? Write this down. Don't make it a huge exercise or something. Just grab pen and paper, just write it down. Then start to map up the stakeholders and the frameworks in the canvas, right? Then go to the navigator and see how this could actually work, and then make a prioritization. As simple as that. It all starts with a little thinking exercise. It all starts with a little bit of pen of paper, and you're actually good to go. Get the training in, get the understanding in, make it work. So complexity together, bring your own dilemmas. Where's your team caught between good options? Where do frameworks collide? Where are you already integrating it? Just have a think about it. Talk about it, think about it. And again, it's the thinking part that is sometimes hard, but it's the only way. And with that, I actually come to the end of the slide deck.
Thank you very much, Matthias. And after this valuable presentation and sharing your experience and knowledge, I recognize that you mentioned about intuitive issues and intentions. These are mostly related to human beings. So still a room for us to continue in such a technology-based work environment, and I hope this is also useful for our audience. And we welcome all the questions. Currently, we have 2 questions. The first one coming from, I apologize if I read, mistakenly, Rick Vander Kelash, and the other one is JX Gumedi. Wasn't consequentialism created precisely to handle real-world trade-offs and ethical pragmatism later on? And how would AI cover the 4 pillars of knowledge system, particularly, as I mentioned, the intuitive system part? Thank you very much.
Yeah, a fantastic question. Yeah, consequentialism is of course it's an absolute important concept or way of thinking, and it's finding the right balance, right? So Rick, that is spot on, right? It's you kind of need to draw different perspectives from different angles. And so basically what it means is, right, so we have 3, 4, 5 solutions, right? And we kind of make a balanced decision and say, like, okay, how many people will have good impact on that? How many people will have a bad impact, right? And then make it more or less like a ethical decision. Or to put it even more bluntly, I have one chapter in my book where I call it causal relevance ethic. So please, Rick, let us have a chat about it, or have a read in my book. The causal relevance ethic is actually doing that. So basically, what I'm trying to achieve with that is trying to put it down to a formula and make a decision based on facts. So, and ethical pragmatism is more or less putting it down on paper and make it actually a decision based on facts and not too much on emotions. But on the contrary, that's why we also need this other pillar, especially the intuitive pillar, because I doubt that we have currently enough data for an AI to act really intuitively. That might come, and it might actually become in a strange way. So let us think that in a couple of years' time, every one of us is wearing one of these watches that measure heart rates, that measure how much we are sweating currently, they measure how blood pressure is and all this kind of things. And an AI who's taking all in this information might actually be a good way to come up with intuitive things. I'm not advocating for it. I'm not arguing against it. I'm just saying that could be a possibility to run this out, right? So I assume in a couple of years' time, or maybe not so much, we will have AI agents which will take on certain management roles, right? And they might be actually capable of managing over 12 people, right? So the normal management rule is don't manage more than 8 or 12 people, because you can't really feel any empathy with them, you can't really influence them properly. But an AI manager might be capable of doing so, because he has, oh, my employee is currently writing an email in that and that tone, which I might, as a human, might have ignored, but the AI, after enough training, might have picked up on it. So I'm currently thinking that especially the intuitive level and the practical level, or knowledge systems, as I call them in the book, are not really yet for the AIs, but it might come.
Thank you very much. Can you tell us your dreams about the future collaboration and the future work environment for cyber defense issues, and how can we handle such risks?
Well, I think that we have an interesting time in front of us. So if you think about AI, one word that comes to mind is speed, right? I mean, it's not just the speed on how fast ChatGPT or any other AI agent is generating any text, right? But it's the speed in which they act and react. So what do I mean by that? Most of the AI ethics say there needs to be a human in the loop, right? So most of us, is like, okay, there needs to be a critical decision in the hospital. There needs to be a critical decision within HR. There needs to be a critical decision for certain things, for financial decisions. So if you look at the EU AI Act, they say, okay, this is critical. There needs to be a human in the loop. There need to be special safeguards. But if speed becomes of the essence, we're kind of removing the person out of this loop, right? Because in cybersecurity. So there's the window of compromise, right? So how long does it take you, an experienced hacker team, to take over your network, has shrunken from 8 hours to under 90 minutes. So if you try, within under 90 minutes to get all the people in the loop to make those decisions, you might actually run short, right? So the future will be most likely, especially when it comes to those technical things, it will be an AI battling in another AI, right? And the unfortunate thing is that the loop, the human in the loop will most likely be disappearing. And this is not just true for cybersecurity, but it will be true for a lot of other AIs. And please understand, LLMs are not AIs. There are a lot of other things, prediction engines, and so forth, that have a much bigger impact on our human society than LLMs.
So thank you very much for your presentation and everything. Yes, we have one more question coming from Perrin Carey. Thank you, Matthias. Thinking about governance and it being the act of governing, how does the use of AI and the meta layer approach assist with developing understandings in human complex systems, such as in boardrooms where the focus is decision making? I'm thinking about the challenge that in human systems we have the facet of free will as a part of the complexity within social systems. So please.
Well, I mean,
Right.
I love that question because it actually brings home why I call the book philosophy.exe, right? Because we need to have the philosophical thinking about this. In regards to this, I mean, let's start with Daniel Kahneman, right? He said like, okay, we have system 1 and we have system 2, right? And that already gives you an understanding what might be actually acting in a free will discussion and what will not be acting in a free will discussion, right? So if I do this, your ears have not the possibility, or your brain does not have the possibility to say, I'm ignoring this sound right now, right? You're focusing it. So we have the attention network, and we have the default mode network. And the default mode network has a higher level of free will agency. So what does that mean? It is interesting to come up with ideas where you say, how do I use or stipulate parts of the brain that have a high agency of free will and which do not have that, right? So certain visual effects. I mean, the simplest thing sometimes impress me. If you do a presentation for the boardroom and you choose a font that is not easily to digest, where you really need to read the font, you're actually forcing the boardroom to actually go into the default mode network, not just analyzing something with the attention network. The prefrontal cortex is activated by sometimes simple facts as using an unreadable font where the management is really forced to do so. So from a philosophical level and from a collaboration level with AIs, I think it's interesting in the future to see how do AIs trigger certain things in the attention network, and how will the AI trigger certain things in the prefrontal cortex or the default mode network. And but this is one of the things, and you pointed out the meta level, right? This is something where the meta level comes in big time, because you need some cognitive scientists, you need some data scientists, you need some empathy experts. You need to for them to come together to actually master this kind of thing. So a single framework, as pointed out at the beginning of the presentation, will not allow you to do so.
Thank you very much. Any other questions from the audience? Many thanks coming from different parts of the world. Thank you very much, Matthias.
it has been my absolute pleasure.
And our last word may be getting ready for a new learning process by training our minds. It's all our duty to get ready for a new digital, risky world, but it can come to a valuable opportunity for us, and we deserve this good opportunities with the good governance approach. Thank you very much for joining our session. And Matthias, once again, our esteemed guest speaker, thank you very much. We hope to collaborate in the future with new, creative, innovative approach and, add value to the literature via our journal. And you are all welcome to submit your papers and works. You are all welcome. Thank you very much.
Thank you.